Just briefly, we had an excellent meeting with President Sheinbaum and Foreign Minister de la Fuente. In fact, we've had a great relationship with the government of Mexico during the 8 months of the Trump presidency. It is the closest security cooperation we have ever had, maybe with any country, but certainly in the history of U.S.-Mexico relations. I think that much credit is deserved to President Sheinbaum and her administration in really taking on things that had not been taken on for a very long time. As one example, 59 high-value targets, people we wanted into the United States to face charges for narco-trafficking. It was Mexican authorities who moved them out of jails and transported them themselves into American facilities where they will stand trial, and we believe not just serve the rest of their lives in jail once a jury hears their case, but perhaps will share valuable information that will allow us to identify even more dangers that confront our countries. Because of our geography, we will always be neighbors. And that means we will always share common problems, whether they be migration. The migration numbers today at the U.S. southern border are the lowest they have ever been. They have ever been. And that is due and thanks and great credit to President Trump for the efforts he's undertaken, but I think also to the efforts of the authorities here in Mexico who have viewed irregular migration as a threat to their own security. Just remember that a significant percentage of the people that were crossing the U.S. southern border illegally into the United States were not from Mexico. They were coming from all over the world, from multiple continents, from halfway around the world. They were coming from Somalia. They were coming from everywhere and crossing through Mexico into the United States. And that was not good for Mexico, and that certainly was not good for the United States. And we have seen those numbers drop historically. And that would not have been possible without the close cooperation between our two governments. But there's more to do, which is why today we are formalizing an implementation group. I know that sounds like a fancy term that means nothing, but it means a lot. This is a high-level group that will meet and coordinate on a regular basis to make sure that all the things we are working on, all the things we have agreed to work on, are happening, are being implemented. So this has been a very productive visit, and we will have many more. We've talked many times. We'll be in touch many more times because there's still a lot of work to do together. But this is an important and I believe a significant day in the relations of our two countries as we are able to continue to formalize this unprecedented, historic, and so far highly successful security cooperation between the government of Mexico and the government of the United States.
Good afternoon. Mr. Secretary and Mr. Secretary, I want to start for you, Secretary Rubio, with a question about the incident that happened yesterday with the Tren de Aragua vessel that was destroyed by the U.S. military. There still seem to be a bunch of lingering questions about how this all came about. For example, how were you so convinced or so sure that they were Tren de Aragua members on board, and what kind of drugs were they transporting and where they were going to? And I'm wondering if you could address any of those specifics, as well as which unit of the military actually carried this out and how. But more broadly, and for both of you, there seem to be concerns around the region now that this might signal a return to the kind of gunboat diplomacy that the U.S. was known for decades and decades and decades ago in this region. And I'm wondering, one, Secretary Rubio, if this is the impression that you want to leave, and secondly, Mr. Secretary, whether Mexico shares the concerns that some other leaders in this hemisphere, quite apart from President Mr. Maduro, share. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me say that from an operational standpoint, I'll leave it to the Pentagon to identify munitions, units, and things of that nature. Let me say this. The United States has long, for many, many years, established intelligence that allow us to interdict and stop drug boats. And we did that. And it doesn't work. Interdiction doesn't work because these drug cartels, what they do is they know they're going to lose, 2% of their cargo. They bake it into their economics. What will stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them. So they were designated as what they are. They are narco-terrorist organizations. So the same information and the same intelligence mechanisms with maybe a higher focus was used to determine that a drug boat was headed towards eventually the United States. And instead of interdicting it on the president's orders, he blew it up. And it'll happen again. Maybe it's happening right now. I don't know. But the point is, the president of the United States is going to wage war on narco-terrorist organizations. This one was operating in international waters, headed towards the United States to flood our country with poison, and under President Trump, those days are over.
You mentioned this briefly in your statement, but why is the U.S. allowing military-grade American-made weapons to reach narco-terrorist organizations in Mexico and across Latin America? And what specific steps will the Trump administration take to prevent these weapons from further threatening democracy and the rule of law in the region?
Let me answer in English and then in Spanish. Part of this working group, part of our security plan, part of our implementation is to stop the flow of armaments. We have the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms involved. We have the FBI involved. And it's not just Mexico, by the way. Those arms are flowing to Haiti, they're flowing to Jamaica, they're flowing to Trinidad, they're flowing into the Caribbean, and we're going to put a stop to it. So that is part of our implementation plan, and it's going to require cooperation, because they're going to seize armaments, and they're going to tell us these are the armaments we seized and we think it came from here, and we'll be able to trace back the networks. It's going to take some investigative work. Or we're going to be able to seize armaments and prevent them from coming because we know these networks and we're going to disrupt them. So that is part of our agreement and part of what we're working on. And by the way, we think it adds to our own security. I would make one more point, and that is the unconventional weapons that some of these cartels are now coming into possession of. We are increasingly concerned that these cartels are now in possession not just of landmines and grenade. We're now seeing the deployment of drone technology by narco-terrorist groups operating out of Venezuelan territory in many cases into Colombia. Imagine drones in the hands of these narco-cartels threatening nation states, threatening security forces. So that's something else we're going to have to focus on. The question is about what this cooperation looks like. Look, we've always cooperated. There's always been law enforcement cooperation. We're talking about amplifying that. We already have started to do it. Just as a great example, let's say there's a gun running group that's coming out of the United States, headed into Mexico. We identify it. We don't get there in time to stop it. We pass that on to the Mexican authorities who can act on it. Likewise, they can identify a drug shipment or that's headed our way. Maybe it got past their systems, but now is in the United States, and we can act on it. Anytime you take people into jail, they become informants. They give you information about the operations of cartels and drug organizations. Sharing that information is also valuable. There's opportunities to cooperate on equipment. Maybe there's equipment we have in the United States. Maybe it's equipment that we have used in the past in other areas of the world, and they have an interest in purchasing it or have an interest in acquiring it, and we can provide that to them. Or vice versa. Maybe they have something that we would want. It also has to do with joint training. Maybe there's things they do operationally that they have learned from their time taking on the cartels that would serve us on our side of the border. Or vice versa, things that we have learned from a training standpoint that they would benefit from. That's the kind of cooperation we're going to amplify on and operate together on. And I think it's very valuable. That's always existed at a certain level. What we're talking about now is formalizing it, systemizing it, making it a regular, ongoing feature of a broader cooperation on an issue of mutual concern.